Automation is the technique of making a system operate automatically. In programming, we use loops to automate repetitious tasks. Loops are one of the most useful features of programming languages, and in this video we're going to learn about some of these loops. Let's first take a look at an example of a while loop. So let us set up a few variables before we perform our while loop. And while loops have this syntax: while, a condition in our parentheses, and then the code to be executed within our curly braces. If in the parentheses we had a true condition, or if we just simply typed true, then this would be an infinite loop that continued to run indefinitely. Right, so be wary of that. Let us now set up a few variables. So let us say const, and let us set a student limit. And let's set our limit equal to 20. And let's set another variable and say set student equal to 0. So now in our while loop, we can specify while student is less than our student limit, we would like to add one student for each iteration. So in order to do this, let us say student and use our plus plus. So this is going to increase by 1. And let's do a console log. And I'm going to use backticks and say there's room for, and let me open up my string, and let's say student limit minus student more students. So let us save this and let us run this. So let's go back, do a refresh, run our loops.html. And we have a constant variable of on line 18. Okay, all right, so we have to ensure, so student limit can be a const, but student, value of student will need to change over time. As you see here, we are increasing by 1. So there you see we have to use let instead of const. So let us save it now. And when we run it, we see that one student is added. Therefore, it counts down, and as students are added to the class, it counts down and lets us know, okay, there is room for no more students. All right, so we have a limit, and then we have our counter, and that is how we can execute our while loops. A do while loop is a bit similar but different in that it executes the block of code at least once. So let us define a variable x and set it equal to 0. And we're just simply going to say do, which is our do while loop syntax, and we will increment x, and let's say x plus plus, and we will just console log x. And then after our closing curly brace, we have to put our condition, and let us say while false. So this loop will not run for very long. What you could do is try to implement this example inside of a do while loop. But let us comment this out for the time being and run our do while loop. And when we run it, we see that it executes our code at least one time. And that is because the do comes before the check. Right? So whatever is within our curly braces will execute before the check is performed. Now a for loop has a different syntax than a while and do while loop. And a for is a type of loop that will use up to 3 optional expressions to implement the repeated execution of the code. So let us comment this out and also this. And let us set up our for loop. So we start with the keyword for, and then we initialize a variable. So let us set I equal to 0. And the second condition is we're going to perform our check. So while I is less than 4. And then the third and final expression will be to increment. So let us do I++. And inside my for loop, I'm simply going to do a console.log of I. So let's just save this and run it. All right, so I is initially set to 0, and as long as it's less than 4, it will console log the value of I, which we can see here starts at 0 and ends at 3. And if this was less than or equal to 4, of course it would count all the way up to the value of 4. All right. Now we can use for loops to modify arrays and to also read the values from an array. So let us look at how we could use a for loop along with an array. So let me set up my array. So this is my array. And let us set it equal to, just an equal to an empty array. Now using our same for loop structure, we can populate this array with the values from our counter. So let me remove this. Let me put a comment to update array with variable values. So we can call our array, and every array has certain functions that we can use, or methods that we can use with it. And one such method is the push. Push adds a value to an array, and we can see the other method here, pop, and pop will remove the last value from an array. So we want to push our counter, which is I, whatever value I is what we want to add. And then we also want to console log our array. All right, so let us save this and let's add a few more values to our array. So let us do 8 values. Let us save this and do a refresh. And we see here that each iteration of our loop adds a value to our array. So this is how we would add some values to an array. So we set a loop. To go over this, we set a loop that runs until I is less than 8. And when this is no longer true, we are telling the console to print our array, and basically at the end of each iteration. And we see how we just saw how these values are printed to our console. Now each array also has a length property, and sometimes we might want a loop to run a number of times without being certain of the number of iterations. So we may not know what this value is in many instances, right? So we may have an array with 100 values or 100 plus values, but we do not know the exact number. We can always call a property of .length on our array to find out how many times we would need to loop through an array. So let's look at an example of this. So let us declare another array. So let's declare a people array. And let's set a couple of people. Okay, so we have an array of 4 people. Now let us set up a for loop that will help us to print all of these values, basically based on the length of that array. And by length, we mean by how many values are in that array. So let us comment this example out and let us declare a new for loop. So we would say for, and we need our counter. So let us set I equal to 0. And then we can say while I is less than people dot length. And this gives us the length of the array. It returns a number based on how many values are in the array. So based on the length, we want to increment I. So do I plus plus. And now we want to print each item of our array. So to do this, we can simply do a console log. And we can just say people, open up our curly braces and put our iterator right inside. And this will print each person. So let us save this, do a refresh. And now we get all the values inside of our array without necessarily knowing how many values are in the array. And we've done this by using the .length property. Let's now take a look at what is known as a for in loop. And a for in statement iterates over the properties of an object. So to demonstrate this, let us create a simple object. So let us say const, and let us define a shark, and let it set it equal. And we are going to have some properties and attributes in here. So let us say species, and this is a great white. And we separate these values by commas. So the color, of course, would be white. And number of teeth. And we can set this to, let's just say 200. I'm not sure how many teeth. All right. Or we could simply just say infinity, which is actually a number. So we can just type it in like this. And now to use our for in loop, let me comment this out. And let's do an example of a for in. So we would say for, and we can create a variable, and let's call it attribute, because we want to get the attributes of that are in our shark object. So let's say attribute in shark, which is our object. And then we want to console.log the attribute. So if we save this and run it, we get the attributes inside our shark, right? And if we want to print the values of those attributes, we can simply console log shark, and wrap attribute in curly braces, seeing that it is basically our counter or iterator. And let us save this. And now instead of the attributes, we get the actual values. Great white, the color is white, and infinity. So if we wanted to name or print them together, we can do this using string interpolation. So let us define our string. I'm using backticks, and with string interpolation, I'm going to first grab the attribute and then put a semicolon, and let's grab the value. All right, so let's save this and run it. So now we get both the attribute and the actual value. And we can do quite a few things with our string, because this is a string variable. We can even call to uppercase on this. So we can say dot All right, to do this, I believe we may have to actually close off our backtick here and reopen it here. So let's concat these two together. And here I'm going to call a dot to uppercase. So this is how we would actually chain a function method onto a string if we're using string interpolation. So we just broke the string up and we concat the second value, and we did a dot to uppercase on our attributes. So let us save this. And now if we refresh this, we see here that our attributes are now all uppercase. Now the for in statement is useful for iterating over object properties, but to iterate over iterable objects like arrays or strings, we can use the for of method. So let us look at how we could use the for of method. So let us define an array of, let's not use sharks, let's use dogs. And let's set this equal to let me just use lowercase here. The pit bull, and let's just say is a thoroughbred. And let's just say he has been, let's say he is, let's just put a number there, he's probably 2 years old. All right, so now using the for of loop, let's comment this out. So we would say for, and inside I would say let animal in our dogs array, and we would just console.log our animal, and if we refresh, we would get the 3 different values here in our dog. And we got numbers here. Let's double check what happened. Oh, this should be off, not in. So let's save this and run it. Right, so now we get the values in our array. We're doing the for of loop now. So that is essentially how we would do it. And if we wanted to, we could print the index. So we could say let and open up some square brackets and say index and close it off here. And let's say dogs dot entries. And then we could console log our index and our animal. All right, so this would be the syntax if we wanted to do that using the for of loop. So let us save it and refresh, and we get each index value along with the key. So we get the key value pair when we set up our for of loop this way. Okay, so let's do one final example, and this one will be an example with a string. So let us say let, and do we have an animal? No, we do not. So let animal equal, and let's just say types of animals. And now let us use our for of loop to iterate through this and print each value in this string. So let's comment this out. And let's say for, and let us say let animal of our animal, or let's just say letters of animal, and let us console log our letters. And these should be all of these letters in our string. So let us save it. And when we refresh, we get all the letters in our animal string variable. So those are just some examples of the different types of loops. We've been introduced to a few new ones, for in and for of. And later down, we will look at how to implement a for each using map and set.